The other day, I realized something was missing from my life, so of course I tried to fix it. But I ended up watching some idol anime instead. Love Live. To be more specific, Love Live School Idol Project. That's the one I watched, the first season of this franchise that's been going on for quite a while at this point. Now, this might be the most modern property that we've tackled here on Kimchi No Video, but it did air all the way back in 2013, so it's already over a decade old. Now, I know that means it's not exactly vintage yet, but it's well on its way to fitting in with all the other Stone Cold classics that we've dove into before. You see, I've always had at least a passing interest in idol culture and idols themselves. I mean, I do have as many Morning Musume VHS tapes as the next guy. I've seen Baby Metal live twice now, and I really like Billy Idol, and that totally counts because Idol is in his name. Plus, I would love to see Billy Idol in a Japanese idol group, so I'll say he counts. I'm also no stranger to idols in anime. Creamy Mommy is one of my favorites of all time, and I've seen Perfect Blue, so that's gotta count for something. However, even with all that being said, why did I skip Love Live for so long? This show basically set the template for the modern generation of idol anime and idol anime fandom culture. Well, that's it right there, the fandom. The show has never exactly had a good reputation in the otaku community due to the fandom being both intense, cringy, and creepy all at the same time. For every girl who watches this show and aspires to idol up her life herself, there's some weirdo in a dark corner of Reddit experiencing this show in a much different way. So it can really skew the idea of even trying to take a look at this show because no one wants to be associated with that guy. However, as idol culture continues to grow in both the Japanese and American anime scenes, I decided it was time to dive into one of the most beloved franchises out there, despite my preconceived notions and ideas about it. There had to be something to this franchise to not only make it continue for so long, but to excel when there are so many similar shows that last for one season and one gacha game before they're killed off and thrown into a ditch somewhere. What exactly made Love Live so, well, loved? But I figured it out as soon as I started watching it, and I must say, this show is pretty punk rock. Yeah, you heard me. This show is punk rock. Kind of. I mean, the music isn't really punk rock, of course, but the parallels are all over this thing. Yeah, Love Live is punk rock. That's my thesis statement, and I'm sticking to it. But before we get into that, what is Love Live School Idol Project about? Well, it's pretty simple. Honoka is a high school girl that loves her school for some reason. Okay, I know that does not sound very punk rock, but moving on. Unfortunately for her, the school is scheduled to be shut down forever due to lack of applicants, and her little sister will not be able to attend. Luckily, she stumbles across a video of a school idol group and discovers how popular they really are, so she decides to form one herself with all of her friends to save the school. And it works. See, I told you the punk rock energy was coming. It's pretty punk rock to make a plan yourself and just do it. Moving on. So after they save the school, they decide it's time to keep going, and they decide to try to perform at the Ozfest equivalent for fictional schoolgirls in anime land. That's right, you know what it is. They want to be part of the Love Live. And to be fair, Love Live is more than just the Ozfest equivalent for fictional schoolgirls in anime land. It's a contest as well. So I guess it's less like Ozfest proper and more like that show that was on MTV where bands were in a contest to play Ozfest. I guess. But anyway, the girls win the contest and then they disband. See, that's another thing here that's very punk rock of them. It's kind of like that time at the drive-in basically did the same thing right as they were becoming huge. So yeah, that's Love Live. I'm sure there's more to it in other seasons, but the first season is pretty straightforward and it was pretty good. I really wasn't sure I would enjoy this show at all. I figured at the very least there was a chance it could come off as just a commercial for the music and video games, or worse yet, be basically some boring cutesy girls doing cutesy things snooze fest. Sure, this was used to promote the Love Live brand, and there were a lot of moments of cutesy girls doing cutesy things, but it just had so much more heart than I expected for, well, something like this. It reminded me of K-On! Minus the guitars. And as a result, it brought one thing to mind. Punk rock. Yeah, I get it. On the surface, you don't really think Bad Brains when you think Love Live. However, when you look at this show a bit deeper, you start to see more similarities to Minor Threat than you do Olivia Rodrigo. And I don't hate Olivia Rodrigo by any means, I'm just saying. You see, early punk rock was all about the do-it-yourself, or DIY for short, attitude that basically said, if you want something done, well, you've got to do it yourself. Do you need a record label to release your record? No, do it yourself. Do you need a booking agent to book your show for you? No, do it yourself. Do you even have a venue to book a show at? No, do it yourself. This way of thinking was pretty much the standard for punk bands in the 1970s and 1980s, with a few exceptions. And by the time the 90s rolled around, the likes of Green Day, Rancid, and pretty much every band on Warped Tour changed things forever. But even all of those bands started out booking their own shows, releasing their own records, and building their own band into their own brand. And to this day, there's still tons of bands out there DIYing their lives up to build something for themselves, so I really don't see this energy ever dying. So, you might be asking yourself, how does this relate to Love Live again? Well, if you're asking yourself that, you've never watched the show and you haven't been paying attention at all. Going back to what I stated earlier, the main girl Hanukkah started this school idol unit because she saw another school idol unit and she wanted to try the same thing. She didn't know how to become an idol, but she went for it. She didn't know if she could actually dance or sing, but she decided to figure it out. She wasn't inspired by whoever was headlining Tokyo Dome at that time. She was inspired by girls in high school on her same level. She wanted something and she went for it. On top of that, she really had a reason for all of this. She wanted to save her school so her sister could go there. Sure, most punks are fairly anti-establishment, but the point here is that punks are usually fighting for something. Well, these girls were certainly fighting for something. Even though the something they were fighting for was a little bit different, the concepts, the meaning, and the energy behind all of it were very similar to punk rock. Plus, a huge part of this show focuses on Hanukkah bringing these girls into the group and inspiring them to create art. You might not consider idol music art per se, but I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that wouldn't even consider Discharge music, so it's all up to interpretation at the end of the day. Many of the girls who end up joining didn't even know this was a thing they could even try to do, but they did it anyway, and they succeeded. The DIY ethos is strong in every one of these anime girls, and I'm proud of them. So naturally, as people join these scenes and subcultures, they are bound to meet people that are way too into said subculture. You might have heard of gatekeepers before. Well, that's who these people tend to be. In the punk scene, it's the old guy in the leather jacket with 10,000 records to his name and nothing but contempt for any music that was made in the last 20 years, yet he can't stop complaining about said new music that was made over the last 20 years. In Love Live, it's a girl named Nico. And Nico is much more lovable than the old angry guy. This girl was obsessed with every aspect of idol culture and fandom, long before she even considered joining the group, or any group for that matter. She had the knowledge, she had the merch, she had the dedication. As a result, the passion and dedication she had for this scene shined through more than any of the other girls because she had more at stake. If the group was terrible, the other girls walked away. For Nico, this was life or death, and to me, that's pretty punk rock. On top of all of that, the way the group worked to set up all of their own shows, pretty punk rock in all honesty. The girls set up shows for themselves in the streets of Japan, they set up shows at their school, and they even fought the elements to put on a great performance. When you hear about all of the bands from yesteryear, you hear about them playing in a school gym or a house show or some kind of non-traditional venue, so I would say this is another parallel that's just too similar to not bring up. And lastly, the visuals. Yes, idols look different than punks, for the most part. However, both scenes have a very rigid dress code that is very important to them to represent what they believe in. Sure, punks will tell you they don't have a specific look, and they would be correct in that fact if you're talking about subgenres of punk from one to the other. Sure, a street punk looks vastly different than some guy from the New York hardcore scene. But when you go to a show for one of these specific subgenres, you're usually going to see quite a few people with very similar styles. For example, go to a crust punk show and count the number of people that look like they have not showered in a decade. I'm sure it'll be about 90% of the room. And guess what? Idols are the same. I mean, they usually look like they've showered more recently, but similar to punks, they have a very specific look that represents visually the music they're about to berate you with. Punks look like their music, and so do idols. both cultures dedicate their lives to this stuff, and that includes their looks. And as if that wasn't enough, both cultures make a lot of their own clothing themselves, or at least customize it a lot. After all, they both foster creativity, and clothing is a natural extension of that, so it makes sense that you can't just walk into a store and buy this stuff. You want to look like something you believe in? Well, sometimes you have to work for that. And there you have it. When you really get down to it, Love Live is very, very punk rock. At least the ideas, theories, and ways of life that it represents in this show, yeah, they're pretty punk rock. Sure, the idol scene might seem very mainstream because the big acts are, well, huge, but when a punk act really explodes, they can get pretty huge as well. I get that the end game for many idols might be very different than the end game for many punk bands, but in the case of this specific series, the ideologies presented are just too similar to be ignored. These girls were just hoping to make things better for both themselves and future generations, so they decided to do something about it. If that's not punk rock, I don't know what is. So if you haven't checked out this series for the same reasons that I avoided it for years, maybe you should change that. While I can't speak for the entire franchise, the first season was great, and I look forward to more. Plus, at the end of the day, there's no way any idol record could ever be nearly as bad as the Dee Dee Ramone hip-hop album, so that's something the entire genre has going for it. Does that mean idol music is actually superior to punk music? I don't know, that's something for you to decide yourself, but regardless, thank you, Love Live, for not being that awful Dee Dee Ramone hip-hop album.